Welcome back to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're digging into a batch of recent presidential actions. 5 documents that came out pretty close together.
That's right. We've got quite a mix.
Yeah, there's an executive order talking about a plan for a U.S. sovereign wealth fund.
Mhm.
Then 2 proclamations, one for American Heart Month, another for Career and Technical Education Month.
Standard stuff there, mostly.
Then things get a bit heavier. National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM2, focusing specifically on Iran.
A significant one, yes.
And finally, a pair of executive orders about the border situation. Updates on those potential tariffs for Canada and Mexico.
Right, amending previous orders from just a few days prior.
So our mission today, like always, is to understand what these directives actually do. What are the core actions?
Exactly. And, try to separate maybe the political messaging or let's call it potential propaganda from the concrete steps being taken.
And we should also flag any obvious constitutional questions that might pop up. Plus, look at the background, the potential impact.
Absolutely. Context is key. So where should we start? That Sovereign Wealth Fund EO sounds like a big one.
Yeah, let's start there. The executive order on establishing a United States sovereign wealth fund. The stated goals are, well, they're pretty grand.
They usually are with these things.
Maximizing national wealth for citizens, fiscal sustainability, maybe lower taxes eventually, economic security for future generations, boosting America's global standing.
It sounds great on paper, but what does the order actually mandate right now?
Well, that's the thing. The core action isn't launching a fund tomorrow.
Right.
It directs the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce to come up with a plan.
Okay, so it's a planning directive.
Exactly. They've got 90 days to develop a comprehensive plan for how such a fund could be established.
So within 3 months, they need to figure out, well, everything.
Pretty much. Funding mechanisms like where does the money come from,
Yeah.
investment strategies, what do we buy?
Structure, governance.
Yeah,
Yeah, how do you run it without it becoming, a political football?
crucial point. And the order specifically says they need to evaluate the legal side, including whether Congress needs to pass a new law.
Which seems pretty likely for something this major, wouldn't you say? Establishing a massive national fund?
You'd think so. The power of the purse usually rests with Congress.
Right. So the order acknowledges that legal hurdle needs exploring.
It also has that standard language, this order doesn't affect other agencies' existing authority or OMBs.
Boilerplate stuff.
Yeah, and implementation depends on the law and appropriations, and importantly, it doesn't create any new rights someone can sue over.
Standard safeguards in these orders. It means you can't just walk into court tomorrow and demand your share of the non-existent fund.
Okay, so thinking about that propaganda angle, is all this talk about benefiting Americans and long-term health just window dressing for now, given the only concrete action is writing a report?
That's a fair question.
Sure.
I mean, at this stage, it is mostly aspirational. The language is designed to sound positive, build support, but the real impact, that depends entirely on the plan they produce and whether it actually goes anywhere politically and legislatively.
It's a statement of intent with a deadline for a plan.
Precisely. Without money allocated or specific investments outlined, it's just an idea being explored officially.
And constitutionally. Directing your cabinet secretaries to write a plan seems, well, pretty standard executive stuff, right?
On its face, yes. Ordering the executive branch to develop policy proposals generally falls within presidential power.
But the fund itself.
That's where the constitutional questions would really come in. Especially funding. If they tried to set it up or fund it in a way that sidesteps Congress's appropriation power.
Then you'd expect legal challenges.
Definitely. The order itself hints at this by requiring that legal evaluation. They know it's a potential minefield.
Okay, let's pivot to the proclamations.
Yeah.
American Heart Month 2025. The tone here is obviously very different.
Yeah, much more focused on public health awareness. The stated purpose is clear. Raise awareness, recommit to fighting heart disease.
It mentions mourning those lost, progress in medicine, the administration's commitment to saving lives, lowering healthcare costs, being an advocate for health.
It hits the standard notes for a Health Awareness Month. It lists the known risk factors: obesity, high blood pressure, cholesterol, lack of exercise, alcohol, smoking. All the usual suspects.
But then it throws in a line about committing to cracking down on big pharma and investigating the rise in chronic diseases like obesity, autoimmune disorders, infertility, autism. That feels broader, a bit more pointed.
It does feel like a shift in rhetoric within a standard proclamation.
Yeah.
That cracking down on big pharma line and linking various chronic conditions for investigation, that definitely taps into certain public concerns and perhaps political sentiments.
It sounds like it could appeal to specific groups who are skeptical of the pharmaceutical industry or worried about those specific conditions.
Exactly. It signals alignment with those concerns.
The proclamation also calls for improving health generally, nurturing a culture that protects the heart. And it notes Congress actually requested this annual proclamation via a joint resolution.
That's important context. It means the basic idea of acknowledging Heart Month has bipartisan roots.
So when we think about propaganda here, maybe it's less the whole thing and more those specific lines about big pharma and the chronic disease investigation. Those seem like the parts that go beyond just awareness.
I'd agree. Those elements feel more like political signaling. The proclamation itself doesn't really mandate specific new actions beyond raising awareness, which was requested by Congress anyway.
And constitutionally, this is pretty straightforward, right? It's ceremonial.
Absolutely. No force of law, no executive power issues. It's a symbolic statement.
Okay, similar vein, perhaps. Career and Technical Education Month, 2025.
Right. Focus shifts to jobs, skills, the workforce.
The main message seems to be valuing hardworking Americans, investing in skills training for, the modern economy, giving people the tools they need.
There's language about reaffirming excellence, investing in training, prioritizing American workers. It references past legislation, too, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act.
Which had bipartisan support at the time.
It did. This proclamation talks about rebuilding the economy, raising wages, strengthening families, all through skills training.
Yeah.
And offering alternatives to a four-year degree.
Training for 21st century skills.
Now, the language here, America First echoes. Rewarding hard work. The idea of technology working for Americans, not Americans for technology.
Yeah.
That has a particular political flavor, doesn't it?
It does seem tailored to a specific worldview or voter base. Celebrating vocational paths, maybe pushing back against a perceived overemphasis on traditional higher ed or tech dominance.
So propaganda-wise, it's using the proclamation to reinforce those specific political themes and values.
But in terms of new action, does this proclamation actually do anything new?
Like Heart Month, not really. It highlights the importance of CTE, aligns the administration with it, but doesn't seem to launch new initiatives or funding via this document itself.
So constitutionally, again, it's symbolic.
Correct. No real constitutional issues with issuing a proclamation like this.
Okay, now for the big shift. The National Security Presidential Memorandum on Iran, NSPM-2. This feels much more substantive.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't symbolic. This outlines a specific, aggressive policy and directs concrete actions across the government.
It starts by listing all the reasons the U.S. is concerned about Iran. It's a long list.
It is. Hostility to the U.S. and allies, state sponsor of terror, naming Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Taliban, Al-Qaeda.
Designating the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization targeting U.S. nationals.
Blaming Iran for Hamas attacks and Houthi actions, mentioning human rights abuses, detention of foreigners, and, of course, the nuclear program violating the NPT. It really lays out the case for a hardline stance.
So the stated policy is basically stop Iran getting nukes and long-range missiles, counter their regional aggression, cut off money to the IRGC and proxies, and stop their weapons development.
That's the gist. Maximum pressure, essentially.
And then it gets very specific with directives for different agencies. What's Treasury told to do?
A lot. Impose sanctions immediately. Enforce existing ones robustly. Review and maybe rescind general licenses that provided relief before.
So tightening the screws significantly.
Definitely. Issue new guidance on sanctions risks. Keep pressure up at FATF, that's the Financial Action Task Force. Look at beneficial ownership rules to stop evasion. Even consider a know your customer's customer standard. It's all about cutting off Iran's money flow.
Wow. Okay, what about the State Department?
State's job is to modify or get rid of sanctions waivers, including the one for the Chabahar port. Drive Iranian oil exports down to zero, including cutting off sales to China.
Zero oil exports. That's ambitious.
Highly ambitious. And lead a diplomatic campaign to isolate Iran globally, deny safe haven to IRGC and proxies, and make sure Iraq's financial system isn't used for sanctions busting.
So diplomatic and economic warfare, basically.
That's the clear intention.
And the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
Work with allies to snap back international sanctions, bring back the broader UN sanctions. Hold Iran accountable at the UN for NPT breaches. Keep convening the Security Council on Iran threats. Use the international bodies.
Got it. Commerce Department.
Focus on export controls. Tighten enforcement to stop tech flowing to Iran's military or weapons programs.
And the Attorney General.
Uh,
The Justice Department has a big role, too.
a huge role. Go after Iran-sponsored networks inside the U.S. legally. Impound illicit Iranian oil shipments. Find Iranian government assets to help U.S. terror victims collect judgments they've won in court.
That's interesting, actively helping victims collect.
Yeah. Plus, indict and prosecute leaders of Iranian-funded terror groups, seek their arrest and extradition, and investigate and prosecute everything else. Espionage, sanctions evasion, material support for terrorism, foreign malign influence, even threats to free speech here, including anti-Semitism linked to Iran.
That is comprehensive. A full court press using legal and law enforcement tools.
Absolutely. It's leveraging every angle of U.S. power.
So, Propaganda Watch. The language is incredibly strong, detailing all the threats. The list of actions is massive. It definitely projects strength, resolve.
No question, it's designed to signal a very tough stance, both to Iran and to domestic and international audiences.
But is it all new? Or is some of this just, turning up the dial on things we were already doing?
It's probably a mix. Sanctions, export controls, those aren't new tools.
Yeah.
But the intensity seems new. Directives like reviewing and possibly rescinding waivers, aiming for zero oil exports, the breadth of the DOJ actions that suggests a significant escalation or formalization of a maximum pressure campaign.
So maybe less new policy and more existing policy on steroids formalized in one document.
That could be one way to look at it. It gathers all the threads and directs a coordinated, intensified effort.
Constitutionally speaking, this seems like core presidential territory, foreign policy, national security.
Generally, yes. The president has significant constitutional authority here. Directing the executive branch on how to conduct foreign relations and respond to national security threats is well within that power.
Could there be challenges?
Challenges might arise from specific actions taken under the memo. For example, if a particular sanction exceeded what Congress authorized, or if DOJ actions infringed on individual rights without proper legal process. But the memorandum itself, as a directive to the executive branch on foreign policy, that's likely on solid constitutional ground.
Okay. Lastly, let's tackle the two border executive orders. February 3rd, updating the ones from February 1st about Canada and Mexico.
Right, the tariff situation. They follow the same script, basically.
They both start by referencing that February 1st determination. President says Canada and Mexico failed to stop traffickers and drugs. That's an unusual and extraordinary threat.
Which allows invoking IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Right, the legal basis used to threaten tariffs in the first place. IEPA gives the president power to regulate commerce during a foreign-sourced national emergency.
Correct. It's a powerful tool.
So these new orders say, essentially, okay, Canada and Mexico have taken some immediate steps.
But we need more time to see if those steps are actually enough.
So the result is a pause. The tariffs are held off. For Canada, that was the 25% ad valorem plus 10% on energy. For Mexico, it was 25% ad valorem.
Paused until March 4th, 2025. The EOs just amend the date from the previous orders.
And they explicitly withdraw exceptions for goods already in transit. So if tariffs do come back, those goods aren't grandfathered in.
Right. It keeps the pressure on.
Meanwhile, Homeland Security and others keep assessing the situation.
Yep. Monitoring progress or lack thereof.
And the key condition is clear. If the crisis gets worse, or if the U.S. decides Canada and Mexico haven't done enough by March 4th,
the president can slap those tariffs on immediately.
So, propaganda angle again. Frame the neighbor's actions as a threat, threaten tariffs, then grant a temporary pause claiming progress. Smells like a negotiation tactic, right? Hardball diplomacy.
It certainly looks like that. It could be genuine acknowledgement of some steps taken by Canada and Mexico, but pausing rather than canceling and keeping the March deadline, that maintains maximum leverage. The initial threat language was very strong, and this pause keeps that threat alive.
It allows the administration to say they're seeing progress while still holding the tariff hammer over their heads.
Exactly. It's a way to potentially achieve policy goals without actually imposing economically disruptive tariffs yet, but reserving the right to do so.
And constitutionally, we touched on this using IEPA for tariffs like this. It's been debated before.
It has. The core question is whether the situation legally qualifies as a national emergency under IEPA, sufficient to justify these kinds of trade actions. Presidents have broad discretion under the Act, and courts tend to defer, but it's not totally unlimited. The legality could still be challenged depending on the specifics.
So, wrapping this all up, Quite a range. A long-term plan for a wealth fund, symbolic health and education messages, a really aggressive Iran strategy, and these conditional pauses on border tariffs.
Yeah, a real mix of immediate action versus future planning. The Iran NSPM and the tariff pauses have immediate operational consequences for agencies. The Sovereign Wealth Fund is, for now, just a planning exercise.
And the propaganda element seems clearest in the aspirational goals of the fund, the specific phrasing in the proclamations, and the strategic framing of the border tariff situation and the Iran threats. Hard to label definitively without seeing what happens next, though.
Agreed. Intent is tricky. But the language choices and timing strongly suggest strategic messaging is part of the goal across several of these documents. The real test is implementation and results.
Constitutionally, it seems like the potential fund needs Congress. The Iran memo is likely within executive power. The border tariffs rely on that debated IEPA authority, and the proclamations are, well, just proclamations.
That sums up the initial assessment pretty well. Each operates in a different legal space.
So, thinking about all this, what stands out as having the most potential to really shift U.S. policy in the near term? Is it the intensified pressure on Iran, the ongoing border leverage? Or maybe the quiet planning for that sovereign wealth fund? It really makes you wonder what the landscape will look like in a few months based on these starting points. What are you watching most closely?